Thank you.
Perfect. So I thought I might just start with a brief introduction, and Sonia did a great job before, but when I've been listening to a few podcasts, I always start with what gives you the right. So what gives me the right to talk about this topic today? And I thought I'd start with my education. So I've traditionally trained as a nurse, so did my diploma and Bachelor of Nursing. And then later, once I'd had some experience working in cancer, I went to do my graduate certificate in cancer nursing to gain more knowledge around that topic. In terms of my working history, I've worked within palliative care, haematology, oncology, and then an oncology specific ICU unit at Chris O'Brien Lifehouse. After this, I went and worked at the haematology clinical trials unit at the Kinghorn Cancer Centre at St Vincent's in Sydney, before leaving that position to come to the AGITG to work as their clinical portfolio lead. So lots of cancer experience. That's been basically my entire nursing profession within cancer. So I am going to go over just the basics of what a clinical trial is and the phases of clinical trials. I'm not sure whether you've had another speaker come and discuss this topic, but I just thought it would be useful before entering into what the AGITG does. So what is a clinical trial? Clinical trial is a research investigation in which people volunteer to test new treatments, interventions, or test as a means to prevent, detect, treat, or manage various diseases or medical conditions. Some investigations look at how people respond to a new intervention and what side effects might occur. And this helps to determine if a new intervention works, if it's safe, and if it's better than the interventions that are already available, also termed standard of care. So clinical trials can help to prevent diseases by testing a vaccine, detect or diagnose diseases or conditions, for example, by testing a blood sample, treat diseases or conditions by testing a new medicine or other medical procedure, or find out how people can control their symptoms or improve their quality of life by testing how a particular intervention affects a condition through things like diet or exercise. So there's lots of things that lead into a clinical trial, and researchers spend years developing new treatments and medicines before involving people. And these are termed preclinical findings, and they're usually done in animal or cell studies. Clinical trials are then developed to safely progress in a series of steps called phases. And there's 4 phases, and the information gathered in each determines if the study can move to the next phase. So phase 1 trials are the first phase, and they're usually around 15 to 50 people with very strong stopping rules here. So it's usually a dose increase, starting at a very low dose and seeing whether that is tolerable to the patient. They're typically explored when all other treatment options have been exhausted, and they're looking at what the drug does to the body and what the body does to the drug, so how that drug is metabolized in the body. And they're often not disease specific. So if you were looking for a phase 1 trial on a database, something you might be searching for is an advanced solid tumor as opposed to a specific disease, for example, pancreatic cancer. If a phase 1 trial is deemed to be safe, then the study can move on to a phase 2 trial. And this is focusing on the efficacy and the side effects of the treatment, and is in a larger population than phase 1, although still quite small, so 100 patients. Following a phase 2 trial, it moves to a phase 3 trial, and this compares the new treatment to an existing treatment or a control. And the control can either be a placebo, so that's a substance containing no active medication, or an established intervention that's already in use. And then finally, it goes to a phase 4 trial, and these involve thousands of people and are looking at the long-term effects in a drug that's already been approved or a treatment that's already been approved. So I thought I'd go over the mechanisms in place to protect clinical trial participants, just because I think it's quite good to know sort of the safety parameters that are involved. So the established phases of trials, so the phase 1 to phase 4, focus on protecting the safety of the patient and making sure that the intervention is in the best interest of the patient. And this all began following World War II, when the Nazi medical war crimes were brought to light and criminalized during the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal. And this resulted in the creation of the Nuremberg Code in 1947, which was the first international code of research ethics and outlined 10 directives for ethically permissible human experimentation. And then following on from this, in 1964, the World Medical Association drafted the first international agreement called the Declaration of Helsinki, and that's still in use today. And that photo there is the World Medical Association meeting to draft that agreement. And then the Nuremberg Code and the Declaration of Helsinki stipulate that informed and voluntary consent be a central requirement in conducting research, and that the risk must be weighted against the expected benefits. Following on from this, ICH-GCP, or the International Council on Harmonisation and Good Clinical Practice, which has its origins in the Declaration of Helsinki, was established in 1996. So you'll often hear of this as just termed GCP, and it provides a unified international standard for the ethical and scientific quality standard for designing, conducting, recording, and reporting trials that involve the participation of human subjects. And one of the most prominent guidelines or principles of GCP is that the right, safety, and well-being of the trial subjects is the most important consideration and should prevail over interests of science and society. So it really hones down on the fact that the participant is the most important person in this whole thing we call trials, really. And then in Australia, clinical trials are governed by lots of different national ethical guidelines and codes of conduct and law, and I've just listed them there. So the TGA is a really good one, the Australian Code for Responsible Conduct of Research, and the National Statement on Ethical Conduct in Human Research are all things that you can easily find on the internet if you needed to. And then following on from that, as you can probably see, clinical trials in Australia are highly regulated, with the primary aim being to protect those participating in clinical trials, as well as the integrity of the research itself. So on this slide, I thought I might just take you through the review process for each clinical trial that's run within Australia. And it starts with the Human Research and Ethics Committee, and they must review all research proposals, including all patient-facing material that's being used for the clinical trial. So things like the patient-informed consent form, the protocol, and any promotional material for the trial must go through the ethics committee, and the study can't proceed without the ethical approval. And with each new update, that also then goes through the ethics committee as well to ensure that the science is sound and that it's going to meet those really strict guidelines. Following ethics submission, the site-specific assessment can be commenced, and this is a governance process completed by each participating site, which helps each site decide if they have the resources available to effectively conduct the proposed research project. And when I talk about resources, I'm talking about pharmacy, any staffing, and medical imaging capability, or any other component that's required by the trial protocol. And then lastly, for all unapproved therapeutic goods, the clinical trial notification or clinical trial approval form must be submitted to the TGA. Now, the TGA is responsible for regulating access to unapproved therapeutic goods for experimental purposes in humans, and the CTN and CTA schemes provide exemptions to use these experimental medicines in humans. So that's the pathway there, and this kind of explains why research can take quite a long time to get to a patient, because we want to make sure that it's the best possible thing that's scientifically sound. So all of these processes are very rigorous, and that's basically guided in GCP and the Declaration of Helsinki. Just breaking it up, this is my naughty little puppy dog. He's a COVID puppy. This is Paddington. I thought I'd put in some silly photos here. He's, I don't know if you can see the outline behind me, but he's just sleeping on the floor next door. So what is the AGITG? So Sonia explained that our long name is the Australasian Gastro-Intestinal Trials Group, but I'm going to refer to it as the AGITG because that's a bit of a mouthful. So AGITG was founded in 1991, so we're in our 31st year, and we're committed to changing outcomes for people with GI cancers or gastrointestinal cancers. Our key priority is to undertake clinical trials and research in gastrointestinal cancers to improve patient care and medical practice. The AGITG acts as the clinical trial sponsor, and you might hear the term if you embark on a clinical trial. So a study sponsor is responsible for the overall initiation, management, and financing of a clinical trial. And most commonly, a sponsor is a pharmaceutical or biotech company. So you might hear of a sponsor being someone like Novartis or Pfizer or AstraZeneca. But in AGITG's case, we're a collaborative group conducting investigator-led research, and our research is funded from government grants, pharmaceutical industry support, and increasingly through philanthropy and community fundraising. And that's done through our GI Cancer Institute, which is the community-facing brand of the AGITG, and helps to raise awareness for GI cancers and helps to support us through raising funds to develop our research. So GI cancers cover a really large amount of cancers. So it's from the esophagus all the way down the GI tract through to the anus. And it's the most common cause of cancer in Australia. And unfortunately, the survival rates are lower than other more well-known cancers. And so AGITG has a very big task ahead of us. Our mission is that we put patients with GI cancer at the centre of our research, saving and improving lives by accelerating the pace of discoveries that lead to cures. Our multidisciplinary collaborative group of research and health professionals translate bold new ideas into life-saving clinical trials that help those patients as quickly as possible. And that's our chair there of our SAC, Dr. Lorraine Chantrill. We harness local and international collaboration to undertake GI cancer research with the aim of improving outcomes for patients around the world. And that's been a real strength for AGITG, which is growing, and we have quite a number of international collaborators now that we meet with regularly. So this is just a bit of a humble brag on what AGITG has been able to achieve in its short 31 years. Over $70 million invested in research. We've had over 70 clinical trials, given access to over 7,500 patients to new treatment that wasn't otherwise available to them, released over 170 research articles, and contributed to over 239 presentations. In terms of our global presence for our clinical trials, so we are both a national and international group, so we are able to provide trials in areas such as Canada, Middle East, Asia, UK, and Europe. We have a very large multidisciplinary membership of medical specialists, scientists, nurses, allied health professionals, and health consumers. And this is totaling over 1,600 members across the world, which we're hoping to grow as we in turn get bigger. And so our multidisciplinary membership and input into our research is a critical point of difference for our organisation. And not every trial or research project involves every discipline. However, we continually strive to bring together a range of perspectives, and we're open to ideas from everyone with an interest in research to address critical areas of unmet need in GI cancers. And our community advisory panel are really key in this. They keep our research grounded in an understanding of how the research will benefit people affected by GI cancers and how accessible our trial processes are for those trial participants. So we're really proud of the fact that we have such a multidisciplinary team of contributors into our research, and certainly that's demonstrated in our development and prioritisation framework. So this is our big framework, which we have been working on for the past year to sort of put it into a picture, the flow of how new concepts come to the AGITG and how they get worked into something that then forms a trial. So our research development and prioritisation framework provides a streamlined collaborative process that reviews and refines research concepts based on scientific merit, feasibility, alignment with AGITG strategy, likelihood of funding, and organisational and financial risk. And the research undergoes a rigorous rounds of reviews, and so it's really interrogated for scientific quality and to make sure that we're getting a lot of community involvement from the very get-go. We have people like Sequest, which look after the quality of life, and we have Crest, which look after the health economics. So they come and consult for us to make sure that we're getting the most out of our trials once they start. Now, I have got a list of the trials that AGITG is currently running. So I will go through them for the upper GI space. Please let me know if this isn't of interest, but I thought I would just include it here because I guess we're in upper GI space, so let's give it a go. So Master Plan is our first trial, and this investigates whether stereotactic radiotherapy, in addition to modern chemotherapy, is superior to the current standard treatment. The patient populations it's investigating are patients with high risk, borderline resectable, and locally advanced pancreatic cancer. And within Master Plan, it contains two sub-studies. So that's our microbiome study. It's a translational research sub-study that collects serial bacterial samples from patients receiving chemo. And the main goal is to describe how the gut bacteria will change before and after chemotherapy. And then the other sub-study is Randoms, which is a dietetic sub-study, and that's comparing a widely accessible tool against the gold standard CT body composition tool to see whether we can improve the management of patients with pancreatic cancer in the future. So it's a comparison study. These are the sites. As you can see, it's spread with that throughout Australia. We've actually got some New Zealand sites here. And we've got an additional 5 sites coming on as well. ASCEND is our next pancreatic cancer study, and the purpose of ASCEND is to determine if the addition of SEND1 in combination to standard chemotherapy with gemcitabine and nab-paclitaxel has sufficient activity and safety in patients with untreated metastatic pancreatic cancer. So this one's quite a new study, only opened in April 22, and we've got 15 patients so far. It is Australia and New Zealand wide, and in fact, we've got Cancer Trials Ireland likely coming on to contribute to the recruitment for this, which is a new collaboration, which we're super excited about. NeoImpact is the last pancreatic study that I'm going to discuss. So this one is also a new study which opened up in May 2022. The study chair is Professor Lorraine Chantrell, and this is a pilot study. So a pilot study is a small study, so 20 patients, which aims to investigate the efficacy, safety, and tolerability of using chemotherapy in combination with immunotherapy prior to surgery in people diagnosed with early stage pancreatic cancer. And like Master Plan, NeoImpact is also completing a microbiome sub-study. So our gastroesophageal cancers, we've got Integrate 2B, and Integrate 2B builds on from the original Integrate study, which demonstrated that the addition of regorafenib prolonged progression-free survival in patients with gastroesophageal cancer. And the aim of Integrate 2B is to determine if the combination of regorafenib and nivolumab improves overall survival compared with current standard chemotherapy options in refractory gastroesophageal cancer. This one is our largest international study. So it's got sites open in Germany at the moment, but that's going to expand to France, the US. We've got sites in Korea, Japan. It's a very large study. And this is just the Australian site. So as you can see, there's a lot of Australian sites that it's open to here. Paleo is our next study for esophageal cancer, and Paleo is investigating the activity of durvalumab given concurrently with chemoradiotherapy to the primary esophageal cancer with the addition of stereotactic radiotherapy to a single metastases. It's hoped that this combination will result in prolonged symptom control, nutrition improvement, and subsequent quality of life improvement. So this one's only currently open at Calvary, Martin, Newcastle, but we're hoping to expand to an additional 7 sites, with 1 site yet to be chosen. And then the last study that I'm going to go through is our gastrointestinal stromal tumour, or GIST study, and this is SSG-XXII, and this is 3 versus 5 years of imatinib. The trial is for patients who've undergone surgery for GIST and who have already received 3 years of imatinib. And the aim of the study is to establish safety and efficacy from a tumour recurrence perspective. And that's open at those 8 sites listed there. There's some more silly photos of this puppy dog. I'm going to just discuss where to search for clinical trials. And if you want, we can go through, or I can sort of do a little demonstration with these websites later if we've got time, and if it's of interest to you. But there's 4 websites that I've listed there. And probably the easiest one in terms of an interface is the Australian government one. So that's australianclinicaltrials.gov.au, the second one. That's probably the easiest one to search through. But I would, it'd be remiss of me not to mention the HITG website, just purely from an ease perspective as well. So what I just want to mention here is that websites can seem very daunting and overwhelming, and that I encourage you just to go and have a play. You're not going to, nothing's going to happen. You've just got to familiarize yourself with the website, and remember that you're searching for options to bring to your next clinic appointment if that's what you were after. In terms of what to search for when you're looking for a clinical trial, there's things that's really helpful for you to know, and that is some disease name and specifics. So for example, where is your disease and has it spread, i.e. is it metastatic? If it's metastatic, you might want to know how many organs are involved, but it's not necessarily the be all and end all if you don't know that. The other thing that's really good to know is how many lines of treatment you've received and what they were. Do you know whether you're eligible for surgery? And have you got any other significant medical conditions? And there's some few things that you might be able to find this information from in one place. So a discharge summary from a recent hospital admission often contains these sort of information. So you might have the specific disease and the location, as well as any metastases. And it might also outline any previous treatment you received. And also it usually does tend to contain your medical history. A referral letter to a specialist will have this information. And if you're registered to the government My Health record, that usually has all of your discharge summaries in one place. So it might be good for you to look at that if you have it. Now, the reason I'm saying that it's good to know this is because of the study inclusion and exclusion criteria. So an inclusion criteria is the key features of the target population that will be used to answer the research question. And the exclusion criteria is the features of the potential study and participants who meet the inclusion criteria but present with additional characteristics that could interfere with the success of the study or increase their risk of an unfavourable outcome. And the purpose of the inclusion-exclusion criteria is to increase the likelihood of producing reliable and reproducible results and to minimise the likelihood of harm to the subjects, as well as to guard against exploitation of vulnerable persons. So I have just done a little copy and paste of an eligibility criteria from one of our colorectal trials. Just as an example here, this one's quite a small inclusion-exclusion criteria, which is one of the reasons I have chosen it. But some of them are quite large, and they are actually available on the clinical trial websites that I had mentioned before. So those 4 websites where you can perform searches will contain the inclusion-exclusion criteria. So in this inclusion criteria, you can see that it's asking, the inclusion criteria is specifying what specific cancer is being tested, i.e. is it metastatic, the age of the participant, so greater than or equal to 18, as well as particular blood result parameters which might affect the excretion of the drug, i.e. your kidney or liver function, or might impact your safety, for example, your hemoglobin, platelet count, neutrophils, and white blood cells. In the exclusion criteria, you can see that people with a markedly reduced ability to carry out their activities of daily living cannot participate. So that's the ECOG performance, that some coexisting conditions are excluded, and that people who cannot swallow tablets are excluded. And that's because this study is investigating a tablet taken orally. So there's some pretty self-explanatory reasons why you wouldn't be eligible if you couldn't swallow. And then this is just my last slide regarding conversation starters regarding clinical trial participation to take to your consultant. So I just thought I'd add this just as a starting point, because I think sometimes people are afraid to bring up this conversation with their doctors. And what I would just say to you is that clinicians ultimately want what's best for you. So I wouldn't be afraid to come to your doctors with questions about clinical trials, because I think they'd be very receptive. What I would suggest is that you be very specific. So for example, if you'd be willing to travel for the purposes of the clinical trial, let them know. You could come with suggestions, like I've had a look at, and if the answer is no, you might want to get a second opinion from a specialist, from a second specialist that focuses on your specific cancer type. And particularly with the advent of COVID, you know, the virtual consultations have become even more acceptable. So you could try and get in with one of for a second opinion, and that can help you feel more confident about your treatment decisions. So the suggestions I've had written here are: have you considered whether I might be eligible for a clinical trial? I was wondering whether you could help me find a clinical trial. I'm very interested in participating in a clinical trial. I've had a look and I think I might be eligible for these. I understand that I've run out of standard treatment options. Would I be eligible for a clinical trial? I'd really like to try a new treatment if possible. So that'd be for like the phase 1 trials. And thank you for looking into a clinical trial for me. I understand that I'm not eligible. Could you help me to understand why I am considered ineligible for this trial? So the reason I put that one up there is because I presented to another support group a couple of weeks ago, and they voiced that doctors haven't been able to really give them an explanation. And so I just added this question just so that you had a way of bringing up that conversation so that you could all understand particularly the elements that you weren't eligible for. So it kind of closes that loop, so you're not left wondering. And then lastly, I've just got our AGITG social media accounts here, because often we will notify you of new trials that are opening or new centres that are opening. And then the YouTube channel down the bottom has lots of information about GI cancers, trials, what the AGITG is about. So if you wanted to go and have a look at that, it might be a really good resource for you.